Sing with me. One more time. This is your cue to sing and not talk. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. If I could have your attention. Just a reminder here that we love schmoozing at IKAR, you know that. But for this lunch and learn over here, I'm just going to ask that if you'd like to schmooze over lunch, there's plenty of space just outside the gym. We have tables set up on the patio where you can continue to have conversations. Kids are, of course, welcome to be in the room, but we invite them to be part of the lunch and learn. Okay, be part of the lunch and learn. All right. Shabbat Shalom, folks. First of all, enormous gratitude to Matan for delivering a absolutely inspiring and beautiful drash this morning. So I want to just explain what the next hour or so will entail, and a little bit of the behind the scenes for how we got to this Disability Shabbat, this October 18th. To the task force, I checked my emails to see when we first started our meetings, and it was 16 months ago that we had our first meeting. So if anyone thinks that committee work at synagogues goes slowly, you're right. But truthfully, the vision behind assembling the task force was to gather together a group of people in our community who could work together to think about the ways in which the IKAR community was doing a phenomenal job being an inclusive and accessible place to those with disabilities, and what were the areas in which we were falling short. And in those conversations that the task force had over the course of the last 16 months, a lot of what we identified were concrete changes that we would like to see advanced in this community, and a lot of what we discussed were the big philosophical and cultural shifts that we also hope to emerge from the work of this task force. And so this particular Shabbat, it's really important for me to say, is one of the many things, one of the many initiatives that the task force has been thinking about and working on. This is probably the most public of those initiatives, but I want you to know that the task force from the get-go has had a very expansive vision for the work that our community can do to make this a sanctuary, as Matan said, in which everyone is known, in which everyone belongs. The task force has been divided into two subgroups. One of them thinking about physical spaces and accessibility and inclusion in physical spaces, of which this is the main one, of course, this building that we rent. And then also our office space, our event space, and any time that we host IKAR programs off-site, what do we need to do to make sure that those programs, those gathering opportunities are as accessible as possible to everyone in our community? And we also had a group that was really focused on education and awareness raising. And this disability Shabbat, in many ways, was the product of part of that subgroup's work. But part of what I want to mention, really from the get-go, is that on Monday morning, you're going to receive an email, like you do most Monday mornings, from the IKAR community called The Weekly. And it has information about all of the wonderful things that are coming up in our community in the upcoming week or so. It also has the recordings of the sermon and the lunch and learn. So all of this you'll be able to watch once again on Monday morning. But you'll also see a link to a survey. This is a survey that one of our subgroups developed that seeks to better understand what are the accessibility and inclusion needs in our community. Because very early on, the Disability and Accessibility Task Force identified that there's only so much work we can do, there are only so many changes we can initiate without better understanding the needs in our community. And so a bunch of people have already come up to me today and said, we're so inspired by the work you're doing, how do we get involved? The first answer to that question is to fill out the survey. We really want everyone to fill out the survey because it is that information which will help us understand what are the next steps of this task force, what are the next steps of building a more inclusive and accessible community here at IKAR. And so what we're going to do this morning is continue in the theme of what Matan shared, which was to feature the individual and personal stories of members in our own community. We're going to hear from 4 folks who are on our task force who are going to tell each short stories about the ways in which their lives intersect with disability. And then I'm going to invite the rest of the task force up to come up and sit in these chairs, and we're going to have a short-ish panel conversation that I'll be moderating in which we dig a little bit deeper into the subject. I want to thank Nicole and Andrew, our ASL interpreters who are here with us today, and welcome you to the community, and I'm so grateful that you're helping make everything that's shared this morning accessible to all in our community. And so, without further ado, I want to invite up our first speaker for today, Leah Lembeck.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. This isn't on. Is this thing on? Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you for coming today and for staying. And I'm very tall, so this needs to be moved up a little. And then we'll have to move it back down for... Okay, is that good? Okay, lock it in. Thank you. I just really appreciate you all being here and listening today for this whole participating in this momentous occasion here at IKAR. We're very grateful primarily for Rabbi Panitz for making this move forward over the last year and a half. So my name is Leah Lembeck, and like most teenagers, my almost 18-year-old son Noah, who's over there, embodies a variety of attributes that are often changing. He's hard to wake up for school in the morning. He enjoys gazing with others. He prefers the music of Taylor Swift and Beyonce, and he likes a good steak. In addition, Noah was born with a rare genetic disorder. And when asked to share with you today a little bit about what this particular attribute means to me and to our family, I kept circling back to one word that seems at once modest and powerful: belonging. Not in terms of merely being present, or for example, of simply being accommodated, but belonging in the thick sense of being known, listened to, and woven into the life of a community. Quite frequently in our journey, our family has experienced exclusion. Sometimes this is deliberate, blatant, or explicit. More often, it is subtle and thoughtless, when another choice could have been made with relative ease to the complete opposite effect. Even well-meaning professionals have made poor choices in this regard, speaking about him rather than to him, discussing symptoms and plans without first creating a human connection with the human being in the room. I remember once an evaluator who, without introduction, reached toward Noah to place a sticker on his forehead and then launched into a quiz about a sheep. Noah, who communicates so clearly with his eyes, was telling her everything she needed to know. No one was listening. But then there was Sarah, a speech therapist who began with the simplest, most dignifying question, "What do you love, Noah?" And she let that question anchor everything else. From there, Noah emerged. His joy for music, stringy toys, bubble wrap, hiking, swimming, playing with friends. His personhood fairly easily came into focus when someone started where belonging always begins, with desire, connection, and joy. Perhaps it was not just coincidence that belonging was the promise of Noah's bar mitzvah Torah portion, Vayakel. And some of you were probably at his bar mitzvah when we were in COVID-y times up on the roof. Vayakel opens with a single world-building verb, and he gathered. Moses gathers the people and calls them to shape a holy community. This is the same Moses who earlier described himself as slow of speech and tongue, who needed help finding his voice and at times needed another's alongside his own. Vayakel also frames belonging in the building of the Mishkan, where everyone contributes as their heart moves them. Their generosity is so robust that Moses eventually has to tell his community to stop bringing gifts because the people have already brought enough. Our Noah teaches us to read Vayakel as present tense instruction. He does not speak with words, but he speaks. He does not walk, but he moves us. If you look into his eyes, you see a steady insistence on relationship. If you attend to his preferences, you encounter an interior life that is vivid and specific. Starting with the question, "What do you love?" is not a sentimental gesture. It is the rigorous ethical practice of meeting a person as a person, and it transforms everything downstream. How we plan, how we teach, how we care, and how we build the commons together. And this is where our disability Shabbat comes in, and where we all come in. We are working imperfectly, incrementally, but earnestly towards a community that is more inclusive in many ways. In disability, yes, and also in age and family configuration, in language and learning style, in economics and cultural background, in the many visible and invisible differences that make a people a people. Our family story is just one example among many, and we offer it not to center ourselves, but to make the invitation concrete. A temple is a place where the sacred work of gathering is renewed week by week, where the simplest questions, who are you? What do you love? What do you need to belong? Are asked early and often, and where the answers are received as contributions to a shared Mishkan we are building together. Inclusion is not the end of the journey. Belonging is. And belonging is not a program we bolt onto the side of our lives or into a few Saturdays of the month. It is the architecture of the temple itself. So here is my prayer and my charge, drawn from our story and from Vayakel, that we become a temple where gathering is not an event, but a habit, where we lead and are led by those who lead differently, where we measure success not by how well we speak, but by how well we listen, and where, in time, there is so much generosity of attention, accommodation, creativity, and care that we, too, have to say, enough, we have what we need. May we keep asking the simple question that opens the door to belonging. What do you love? And may we keep building the kind of community where the answer matters. Shabbat Shalom.
Extraordinary. Thank you so much, Leah, and thank you, Noah, for sharing your Torah, your wisdom, your love with this community. It's my honor to invite up our second speaker today, my colleague, Jess Solomon, who, if I may, Jess and I are the staff liaisons to this task force. Everyone else you're going to hear from today are lay leaders. And I'm just so grateful to be doing this work alongside you, and the many meetings in between the meetings that we have really always, every time, showcase the tremendous intentionality and love that you have for this community. And so I thank you, and I'm so thrilled the community is going to hear a piece of your story right now.
Shabbat Shalom, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jess Solomon, and as you just heard a bit, I'm the Communications and Content Manager here at IKAR, and I've had the pleasure of serving on this task force. So we're going to play a quick game of Never Have I Ever, which involves each player saying something they've never done, and the players who have done it put a finger down. Usually we take turns, but for today, I'll just share my whole list in one go. So if you're able to, either put up or visualize 10 fingers. Is everybody ready? Yes? Okay. So you'll put a finger down if you have done this thing. So never have I ever run. Never have I ever gone for a jog. Never have I ever walked down the stairs, one foot over the other, without holding on to a railing. Never have I ever gone on my tiptoes. Never have I ever jumped up and down. Never have I ever sat crisscross applesauce. Never have I ever worn flip-flops. Never have I ever worn shoes outside of the house without my leg braces. Never have I ever walked around my house barefoot for more than about 5 minutes. And never have I ever worn shoes with a heel of any kind. You can put your hands down if you want, or up, or whichever you want. So you'll have noticed that this list is solely physical actions, and the reason I'm up here today is because I identify as a person who has a physical disability, specifically arthrogryposis, which everyone looks at me like I have 3 heads, and it's just phonetically spelled. Scoliosis, a leg length discrepancy of 3 centimeters, and I require braces to walk. So for those of you with most or all of your fingers down, you might feel a bit of shock, or maybe pity, sometimes embarrassment, because these actions come second nature to you. When something is high on a shelf in a grocery store, I assume, you just simply get up on your tiptoes. For me, I either put my weight on my right leg and lift up my left leg, and while holding onto the lower shelf with my right hand and reach up an arm, try to grab the item, or I'll ask someone next to me if they can reach it. Likewise, the idea of just slipping on your shoes and getting out the door is an action and a phrase that's foreign to me. What do you mean? You just put on your shoes and you walk out? I can't conceptualize that. For me, I have to put on my socks, put each foot in each brace, Velcro them up, make sure my lifts are in my shoes that I want to wear that day, comfortably wedge each foot into each shoe, lace them up tightly, and stand up, walk around a little, see how they feel, and then if needed, readjust. Every single day, this is part of my life. There's not a day that goes by that I don't do that unless I'm not leaving my house. So when I look at this list, the Never Have I Ever list, I don't just see things I've never done. I also see the ways my body and my environment have always been in conversation. These nevers aren't about limits or pity. They're about the quiet realities that shape how I move through the world. Each one, never running or never walking down the stairs without a railing or never wearing flip-flops, reminds me that the world was not built with everybody in mind. Because of that, I experience everyday spaces differently. I notice the ramps and the railings, definitely uneven sidewalks, and heavy doors. I think about where to sit, how to navigate in crowds, and how long I can comfortably stand. Where others see something ordinary, I often see a challenge, a calculation, or a small victory. This perspective has taught me awareness, a lot of creativity, and resilience, but it has also made me wish that more people understood that accessibility isn't about special treatment. It's about, as we heard earlier from Matan, equal opportunity to live fully. Shabbat Shalom.
Invite up our next speaker today, Laura Goodkind. As Laura is making their way up, I just want to say a word that this work that the task force has been doing is really alongside the work that's been happening in our Limudim community, spearheaded by Rebecca Berger and Saba. Is Saba here? I thought I saw them earlier. They left. Saba, who is our inclusion specialist for Limudim, and Laura has been very involved and a crucial player in helping our Limudim be a space where all kinds of children can learn. And so I'm grateful to you for the ways that you were professionally involved in this work at IKAR even before this task force began. Laura Goodkind.
Now I feel like I don't even need to read the first paragraph. Thank you for the introduction. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. My name is Laura Goodkind, and kind of like God, you can skip the traditional pronouns. Just refer to me by my name, Laura. So I'm a Limudim teacher. I created an inclusion class called the Limudim Connection. I'm a longtime IKAR member and a Jenny Coyne spouse. I have several disabilities. The first, cerebral palsy, was diagnosed when I was an infant, and it was likely the product of being born 3 months premature. That's 28 weeks for those who are counting. Okay, so I compete in adaptive sports, and I'm a 2-time Paralympian. I competed in para rowing in 2016, as well as 2021. They had to rebrand. They couldn't rebrand it because it costs a lot of money. And I hope to continue that chapter in future years. As a child, my parents strove to make me as normal as possible, encouraging me to walk and enrolling me in only able-bodied sports. When I was 6, after my regular annual neuro checkup, which was fine, nothing better, nothing worse, my brother started to develop neurological symptoms. Due to his age, he was 8 at the time I was 6. It took 2 years to diagnose him with a terminal illness called NF2, which is a rare genetic disorder. Suddenly, I became the less disabled one. That's possible. There's no hierarchy, just so you all know. But it was in my family, there kind of was. I continued to play able-bodied sports. I went to specialized high schools to address my learning needs. And while I graduated high school at 18, it took another 17 years to get through and graduate college. Until my late 20s, when I discovered adaptive sports and the community connected to those, my disabilities were minimized, despite their daily impact. In 2014, a dietitian suggested I try adaptive sports. I, maybe like many of you, thought wheelchair sports were, well, for people in wheelchairs. I didn't use a wheelchair to get around, so why would I walk onto a court pushing my wheelchair? However, after playing able-bodied tennis and basketball for 1 year in junior college, it was clear I had plateaued in the able-bodied sports world, and at some point I was unable to keep up with those who didn't have CP or other physical disabilities. So I decided I'll give adaptive sports a try, since my competitive spirit was still is running very strong. When I became homeless for medical reasons less than a year after starting adaptive sports, at the time table tennis and rowing, I noticed that everyone around me in the eventual shelter I lived in was using substances to alter their realities, and I decided to stick with sports to manage my reality. No doubt about it, sports saved my life, gave me purpose, and kept me grounded. I've competed nationally and internationally in para rowing, wheelchair tennis, wheelchair basketball, adaptive surfing, and most recently, because of course I need another, picked up adaptive climbing. The adaptive sports world has introduced me to people all over the world with disabilities like CP, spina bifida, spinal cord injuries, blindness, dwarfism, limb differences, etc., 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 etc. It's also opened my eyes and my mind in terms of how I view myself as a disabled person. For example, growing up, I was taught that walking was the most important thing because that's normal. I was told never get welfare because that puts me in the system, whatever that meant. I eventually needed the system, which has helped me tremendously, helped me secure housing and stabilize multiple medical challenges. Aside from after surgeries, mobility aids such as crutches, walkers, and wheelchairs were never something I considered using growing up. However, now that I've spent a significant amount of time with others who are like me and use a variety of mobility aids, I realized what a blessing they can be. They aren't something bad or something you use because you can't walk or move normally. They truly are an aid. Now, I have a wheelchair that I use anytime I go somewhere that involves a lot of walking, like amusement parks, traveling, IKEA, it's a big store. And also on trips to a grocery store when I'm short on time and I know it'll be more effective for me. A lot of people use terms like differently abled or special needs to describe disabled people. Everyone here has different abilities, and our needs aren't special. If we design spaces with all needs and abilities in mind, aka universal design, and keep B'Tselem Elohim in our hearts, we can create a world that's truly inclusive and accessible. Thank you.
When we have this Shabbat again next year, I hope to introduce you and call you up as a 3-time Paralympian champion, Laura Goodkind. All right, what is it? LA 2028. Okay, so it'll be a few years. Our fourth speaker today is Tom Fieldsmeyer.
Shabbat Shalom. About a dozen years ago, I was sitting in shul with my wife, Sean, toward the end of Musaf, when a fellow congregant came over to us. This was at a different shul down the street. She said, "Are you aware of what your son is doing out in the lobby?" We have 3 sons, but I knew which one she was talking about. Our middle son, Ezra, the guy over there, who was about 17 at the time. And as we followed her out to the lobby, I thought about Ezra and about that shul. Years before, he had been only a month or 2 into that synagogue's preschool when the teacher pointed out that Ezra wasn't like all the other kids. When they sang songs, he didn't join in. When they played on the playground, he didn't connect with the other kids. What he seemed to enjoy most was sitting on the floor of the preschool classroom, flipping through picture books, fascinated by the pictures and the words. Not long after that, Ezra had a diagnosis, autism. And back then, most of the approaches to autism had one goal: trying to make the autistic person look as normal as possible. You've heard a theme here, I think, among all the speakers, trying to make the person look as normal as possible. So we took the opposite approach. Whatever Ezra loved, we followed his lead, and we used his interests as points of connection, ways to help him engage with the world. Animated movies, the zoo, dogs, whatever he loved, we loved too. And we also made sure that he got out in the world. So he came to services with us every Shabbat. And there, too, he didn't do what all the other kids did. Like a lot of people on the spectrum, Ezra had sensory challenges. He was very sensitive to loud noises and being in crowded places, to bright lights. So at the Kiddush on Shabbat, he had this strategy. He would stand in the door to the room, the big room where the Kiddush was. He would spot the cookie table because he loved cookies. He would cover his ears, cup his hands over his ears. He would run to the cookie table, grab a cookie, and then run back and eat it out in the quiet space out in the lobby. And during services, as we all made our way through the Siddur, Ezra would sit beside us flipping through his picture books, Disney books, animal encyclopedias, Dr. Seuss, Sesame Street. And then at some point he'd get bored and he would wander out into the hallways. And that brings us to that Shabbat morning when our fellow congregant approached us. Are you aware of what your son is doing out in the lobby? So we followed her out to the lobby, and there, sitting on the floor of the lobby, was Ezra. He was flipping through a picture book. Only this time, he wasn't alone. He was surrounded by a circle of children, 4- and 5-year-olds. They had finished their Tot Shabbat program, and they were with their teenage counselors waiting for their parents to come out of services. And they were circled around him, and Ezra read, and they listened. And he was animated and engaging, and the kids were mesmerized. And then we sort of followed Ezra's lead again. So the next week that happened again, and the next week again. And after a while, we went to the person who ran the ECC, and we said, at that synagogue, and said, the very ECC that he had gone to for a very brief time, and we said, could you do this in the preschool? And she said, sure, I don't see why not. So he did, and the kids loved it. That became a weekly visit. One thing led to another, and after a while he added another school, and now a decade later, Ezra reads to children every day at a different Jewish preschool, including the IKAR ECC, where he ends every Friday afternoon reading to the kids, which he's done for several years. It's his job. Sometimes I'll be with Ezra at Trader Joe's or Glot Mart, and we're walking down the aisle, and there's another shopper pushing a cart the other way, and they're holding the hand of a young child, and the kid will look up and spot Ezra, and it's like they saw Taylor Swift. Mommy, that's Ezra, he reads to us. And Ezra will say, that's right, you know me. And isn't that what we all want? To be known, to be appreciated, to have a purposeful role in our communities. One last thing. In my mind, this story has a hero. Ezra is a hero, but the real hero of this story is that person who approached us that morning. She wasn't a close friend. She wasn't a synagogue employee. She was someone in our community who noticed something special happening and pointed it out. Whether or not you have a disability or have a loved one with a disability, you have a role in this story. When you look around at the people in our community, don't look for the deficits and the differences. Look for what they can contribute. You might see something that they haven't even seen in themselves. It's really just about connecting and being aware of what's going on out in the lobby or wherever you are. Thank you.
We do another round of applause for our 4 speakers, for Leah Lembeck, for Jess Solomon, for Laura Goodkind, for Tom Fieldsmeyer. And I want to invite the full Disability and Accessibility Task Force to come up and join me for a few question and answers, a little bit further of a conversation. And Tom, I'm so grateful that my 3 kids have had the benefit of having story time with Ezra. All right, so I want to introduce the other folks on our disability task force who have been at this for the last 16 months, in part imagining, envisioning, and planning this day, but as I said before, really engaged in lots of different avenues of work in this task force for this community. So next to me is Jenny Coyne, David Parker, Tom Jess Deborah Bronner, Ilana Artson, and you heard from Laura and from Leah. I also want to mention two members of our task force who couldn't join us for this Shabbat, but have been part of the work through and through, Deborah Musher and Dara Resnick. Matan, also who you heard from before, and has been part of our task force. So first and foremost, thank you. Thank you to this team of people who have inspired and envisioned and who I know are excited to have the debrief conversation on this Shabbat and to start the work of imagining what comes next, because there's so much more to do, and this is such a wonderful way to start. So I'm gonna ask a few questions. With a panel of this size, we did the responsible thing, which was to divvy out a little bit who was going to answer what questions. So you'll hear from 2 or 3 folks in response to each question, and then we'll go from there. So I want to start with what Tom mentioned even as one of the recurring themes of the different speakers that we had today, which is which connects to the disconnect between how society perceives those with disabilities and how those with disabilities perceive themselves, and this very problematic term, which you all, I think, put into quotation marks, normal. Right? And once you have something established as normal, you then have all of the variations on normal that are so often coupled with a negative connotation, right? To not be normal is to be in some way problematic or a nuisance or, a glitch in the system, which we've got to figure out how to work around, right? And that is, of course, not the approach that we are striving for here in this community. It's not the approach that each of you in your own way mentioned as being the one that affirmed the dignity of either yourself or your family member with disability. So I wanna bring, you can see behind us, we have all these phenomenal quotes, thanks to our task force and this project led by Tom Fields-Meyer for designing these quotes that really helped us connect with the work that we're doing. So I have a Judy Heumann quote. It's not the one that we put up on the poster here behind us, but Judy Heumann, who is a phenomenal 20th century disability rights activist of blessed memory, who passed away recently within the last few years, she wrote, and I quote, "It is not a tragedy to me that I'm living in a wheelchair. Disability only becomes a tragedy when society fails to provide the things we need to lead our lives, such as job opportunities or barrier-free buildings." So I want to ask Jenny to start us off reflecting a little bit about how your loved one's experience with disability connects to this very teaching.
Is this on? Oh, it's on. First of all, thank you, Rabbi Panitz, because none of us would be up here if it weren't for you. Well-deserved applause. First of all, second of all, I guess that was first of all. If you don't know who Judy Heumann is, look her up after Shabbat. Go on Netflix, watch a documentary called Crip Camp. It's incredible, and Judy Heumann was a force to be reckoned with, and the world is really a better place because she lived in it. But I think her quote nails it. We think of accessibility most often as an afterthought. We build a building, we create spaces, and then we think about, oh, how is that person in a wheelchair going to get in? How is the blind person going to navigate the space now that we've set up all these chairs? How are deaf people going to have access to what we're saying? and then we're trying to build something in a space that wasn't really intended for those people. So if we build spaces using, as Laura mentioned, universal design, this concept that if we build a space already taking into consideration accessibility and inclusion needs, then we don't have to figure out after the fact how to adjust or adapt a space to make it accessible. And I think that's really the biggest thing, is just in all things you're doing, think about from the beginning, how do we make this space truly inclusive? Rabbi B'nai Lappi talks about inclusivity in stronger terms than I'll use, but essentially says inclusivity is a lost cause, because once you start talking about how do we make our community inclusive, it means that you've already created a community that is not inclusive. So for it to be truly inclusive, you needed to think about that before you built the community, rather than trying to backtrack.
So Judy Heumann talked about physical barriers, buildings that are built without people in wheelchairs in mind. My experience with my son, Ezra, hi Ez, is with a neurodivergent person who doesn't have those physical, it doesn't encounter those physical barriers, but it's true also that just as a lot of buildings weren't built with people in wheelchairs in mind, a lot of institutions, a lot of society was built without neurodivergent people in mind. So the places, we had a lot of trouble when Ezra was young finding the right school setting for him, but the place where we did not have trouble was finding a summer camp for him to go to. So when I think about inclusive places and barrier-free places, I think of Camp Ramah in California, where there is a program called the Ezra program. Your son Benjamin was part of it too. I think others. Was Jacob part of the program at some point? So in Ezra's experience, that Camp Ramah was a place where there weren't barriers. There were, Ezra didn't go to a camp for kids with special needs or kids with disabilities. He went to a camp that included all of these people and made space for them and created connections between him and his peers and all of the campers, so that they grew up in a place where they spent their summers in a place with people, neurodivergent people who they might not have connected with the rest of the time. I also want to add one thing, that in my story about how Ezra came to read to children, what happened with him reading in the lobby of a synagogue and what he does every Shabbat here out in the lobby and wandering around, that can't happen. You know, you can't sit down at the Grove and start reading books to other people's kids. But that's a beautiful thing that synagogue communities, that spiritual communities can do in ways that aren't even necessarily designed in that way, but because we are all come into a space and where we want to interact with each other and we're open to other people, just by nature of what we're building, we allow those spaces, and it's just been amazing for us to have this place where he can come every week and feel comfortable and meet all kinds of people and learn their names and their kids' names and what books their kids like.
One of the recurring themes in the four speeches earlier, and connected to Matan's sermon today, had to do with being known, right? Being that belonging to some degree is the product of being a familiar face within the community, and that being known is more than superficial recognition. It includes really understanding that person's story and what they love and what lights them up and what's hard for them and where they come from and so forth. And really, I would say in many ways that's one of the primary goals of this Shabbat is to create a community, as Matan said earlier, in which more and more and more people feel that they are known. And there are always gaps in knowledge, right? There's always things that might be hard to understand about someone's story, perhaps because it's foreign to our experience, or because it's just not something that we've known, anyone in our family's lives we've known. And so I want to ask a few of you to reflect on what some of the aspects of living with a disability that you have found to be difficult for non-disabled folks to understand. What are some of the aspects of living with a disability that you've found to be difficult for non-disabled folks to understand? And Laura, maybe we'll start with you.
Where to start? I think the one that comes to mind first is a lot of people, if they can't see the disability, they think it doesn't exist. And it is not okay to, think poorly of somebody because they parked in a space and you think that they don't deserve it or you need it more or this and that. There's no, again, if they got the space, if they took it, let's have good faith in one another and believe that they need it just as much. The invisible disabilities are really hard. Even amongst the disability community, going a little rogue, sorry, even amongst the disability community, they're unfortunately, they like to have a hierarchy, and I'm often told, oh, but you can do this, and I'm like, you don't know my story because you're not asking. So I think it's really important to inquire and just keep an open ear and really, really practice empathy, not just sympathy. Sympathy is, oh, I feel bad for you. Empathy is, I feel you.
Others? This is a free one. If anyone wants to take it, it's yours. If you want to answer the question, it's fine.
I'll tell you a quick experience I had yesterday. We're going to Disneyland soon, which is one of Ezra's favorite places, and Disneyland has disability access passes. It's a long, without going into a lot of detail, what you have to do is you do this video visit with a Disney, what they call them, cast members, employees, and they determine whether you have a disability that means that would make it difficult for you to do something like stand in a long line. So I am on with this, Ezra and I are on this video call with this person trying to get this disability pass, which he's gotten many times, because it's possible for him to wait in line, or it's possible for him to wait. It's just being around lots of people and being in a confined space is difficult. So you have to kind of, he advocates for himself, and he's really good at it, and he'll say, I have a lot of anxiety, and they say, what does that look like? And he has to tell them what it looks like. And the person said, well, if you go to the supermarket and you're in a long line, what do you do? Or she'll ask me, what does he do? And I said, we avoid the line. We go somewhere else. And she said, what if they're awful? I say, then we don't go to that supermarket with him. So what it makes me think about is how people with disabilities have to, in a lot of ways, plan their lives, every aspect of their lives around the disability. And a lot of times people say, that is an invisible thing and you can't see that. But sometimes you're not even aware of it yourself, or the person with the disability isn't aware of it themselves, because it becomes second nature. But it's part of the added burden of just going through life like that.
My sister, Emily, who's 6 years older than me, she was born with a rare neurological disorder called Leig's disease. And over the years, her ability to walk has shifted. When we were young, she had orthotics, and we would walk slowly to synagogue. A walk that would take me 10 minutes would take her 30 minutes. And over time, she started to use a walker, and now she primarily uses a wheelchair. And I remember as a 7, 8, 9-year-old being so frustrated with how long it took to get to or from synagogue. And I was expected to walk with my sister, to not go ahead, to walk alongside her. That was what I was asked to do. And just feeling so frustrated. Why is this taking so long? And at one point, my parents just said to me, I want you to imagine, go up against the wall and squat, like a wall squat. Do that for 60 seconds. Now, in that same position, I want you to walk from where you are across the backyard to the other side of the backyard. I said, in the squat, how I'm standing right now? And he said, yeah, in the squat, how you're standing right now. And I made that walk, and it was painful, difficult, and of course, extremely slow. Right? And it's a moment I've thought about a lot, both with gratitude for my parents and, to be perfectly honest, wondering, what other lessons could be taught by trying to inhabit the body, the mind, the worldview of my sister, right? That is a particular focus on the challenge that she experiences moving through the world, but it was helpful to me as a way of finding empathy and identification for what was, for me, a very simple activity, walking to and from her, and which for her was a very painful, difficult, long, arduous activity, which often included falling and getting injured. And so sometimes just these small moments that help us shift our perspective on, as Jess spoke about earlier with the 10 fingers, right, on the things that perhaps you take for granted as being a standard or simple activity, which in fact for others are far from that. I want to think a little bit about this community and ask folks on the task force to reflect on some of the greatest obstacles you or your family member have encountered, even here at IKAR. Everything said with love in an effort to try to make this community the community we all want to inhabit. What are some of the obstacles you or your family have encountered here, and how can our community work to overcome those and get it right? And maybe I'll ask Ilana to start us off.
Well, maybe picking up on that last story, I will tell you that when Jacob was growing up, people would come to us about, let's do some programming about disabilities to help, the teens or the students know what it's like to live with a disability. And they would, come up with, how do we imitate being a person in a wheelchair or a person who's blind? And I said, well, if you want to know what it's like being a non-speaking person with autism, you sit in the corner of the room, nobody ever looks at you, nobody talks to you, you feel like you don't exist. So I want to say thank you to this community, because IKAR is the one place in Jacob's world where he comes and he says, I feel like a person here, not a person with autism. So I want to tell you how we came to join this community. About 15 years ago, the Jewish Federation here in LA did a half-day program where they invited teams from synagogues to come and talk about including people with disabilities in the Jewish community. This was the first time they had done something like that. And my husband, Rabbi Brad Artson, and Jacob both presented at that conference. And one of the things that Brad said is, you can't have a conference like this and not have anybody with a disability speaking or presenting. So you should invite Jacob to come and speak to your synagogue. And as far as I could tell, nothing came from this conference at the Jewish Federation. But about a month later, Brad got an email from this person named Melissa Balaban saying, hello, I'm the executive director of IKAR, and we would like to invite Jacob to come as our first scholar in residence. So this was 15 years ago when we were meeting in the solarium at the JCC, and Brad was actually away that weekend, so Jacob and I came, and there were a few Limudim kids at that time. They came in, and when we got there, Jacob was too nervous and excited to go inside. So I gave his speech to Rabbi Browse, who read it, and during that time, that 7 minutes, Jacob was watching really carefully, and he saw how engaged and warm and caring and inclusive everybody in that room was. And at the end of those 7 minutes, Jacob was ready to go into the room, and he sat and he answered questions for 30 minutes. And when we left, he typed to me on his letterboard, Ima, why don't we go to that shul? And I said, when Abba comes home tomorrow, we will be talking about joining that shul. So I want to talk about some of the many ways that IKAR has made it possible for Jacob to be part of this community, starting with that. And that's because Jacob came into this space with people knowing all about him, about his abilities, not just his external appearance. So there used to be something called the Teen Beit Midrash. I don't think it exists anymore. But it was for the high school students. And because one of Jacob's strengths is writing, that was something he could participate in. So he came and there were 6 or 7 kids, and he was able to be part of that Torah study for an hour. And so that was a way that he could engage. When 3 years ago, Jacob moved into his own place, I had spent years and years and years thinking, how are we going to mark that? Because I knew that Jacob wouldn't have a lot of the milestones that others had. And I had planned out this whole way that we were going to mark it. And when the day finally happened and he moved out, I thought, how silly of me. It's obvious how he should mark this. He's going to have an aliyah at IKAR. And I don't know if you remember that aliyah, but Rabbi Panet spoke so incredibly beautifully to Jacob. And then there are the less structural things. And so I would like to thank every member of the clergy here who in some ways truly saw Jacob for who he is. Remember early on in our time here when we used to meet and have services in the community center at Roxbury Park, and Jacob was so moved, he got up and he started to dance right in front of the davening team. And Brad and I looked at each other, it's like, is this okay? Because we spent 10 years at a synagogue, which was not okay. And afterwards, Rabbi Brous said, are you kidding? That's why I created IKAR. You saw Jacob carry the Torah today. That was not his first time. The first time was when he was invited to open the ark, and he took the Torah, and he walked up to the microphone, and he started to sing. And Hillel watched and said, that's fine, that's okay. And everybody else watched and said, that's fine, that's okay. And when Jacob has that opportunity, he says, you know, I can't pronounce the words clearly, but everyone knows that I know them and they don't care. And that's what's special about this place. I want to thank Rabbi Jensen, who, when Jacob comes to tribe school, makes sure to notice him and include him. I want to thank Rabbi Silver, who talks about Jacob's commentary during the service and smiles and finds opportunities to include him. Thank you, thank you, thank you to all of the rabbis here. Here is the message that I have for the leadership. My message for the leadership is, I think that Jacob is fortunate that we joined the synagogue 15 years ago, because if we had joined today, I don't know that this community would be accessible to him. It's just so much larger and it's so much harder. So how do we make sure that all those other people with disabilities are, all of our other Jacobs, get seen in the way that he did and have opportunities to take their strength and have that be part of the community? And then what I have to say to everyone else here is, this is not about the team that is, you know, the clergy and the board. It has to be the committee of the whole. And that's why this place works for us, because we went to another synagogue for 10 years where the clergy were very, very supportive. It's just the other people weren't, and so it didn't work. So I want to pick up on what Tom talked about, because I want to just conclude with an experience that I had and a story that it made me think of. We have a very dear friend who leads a program for people with disabilities in Israel, providing bar and bat mitzvah. And she told us about one of the young men in her program and how in their community, and I think this is a young man with CP, they have a number of families who know their son well enough that on Yom Kippur, each family will take 1 hour to spend with their son so that the mom can go and participate in services on Yom Kippur. And I thought of this story because before the pandemic, this happened a number of years ago, before services were streamed everywhere, Jacob's Aid quit right before the high holidays, and so there was a year that I just didn't have high holidays because there was, my son can't go to childcare. And so if his aid isn't there, and Brad is leading services at high holidays, I don't go, and we didn't have those 8 people. So I guess what I would like to ask this community is, we're so good at supporting people. Remember to support those families. And I just want to conclude with something that Jacob has said about being made in the divine image. And our job is to find that divine image in each person around us and in their families and support it. Thank you.
Amen. Amen. Well, so building on the sort of charge, right, for everyone here, and the recognition that this is the work of the collective and not just the leadership. I want to ask you to help us identify one thing that each person could do, right, on Monday morning or tomorrow morning to help make your community, whether that's this place, your workplace, your school, your home, more accessible, more inclusive. What's one thing? Give us something concrete, tangible that we can take with us and implement to continue the work of building the world that we wish to see. And you all know that I skipped a question here, and if there are folks maybe who we haven't heard from yet, and if you feel moved to answer this question, happy to have you go first.
This is holiday related. String lights on your railings look beautiful, but they are completely impractical. And same with flower arrangements and everything on your stoops. Then you can't get to the railing. So when I'm at businesses that have this, I ask to speak to the manager and say, think about moving your decorations on the outside so that I can still use the railing and see the pretty decorations, but that the decorations aren't hindering my ability to get into your business. And it's the same that the trash cans that are over on the sides of the railings in the gym, sometimes they're placed next to the railing. So I always move them over so that there's room to grip the railing and have the trash can.
Mm-hmm. Hear, hear.
Hi. I would say generally this is sort of just an everyday thing, which is it's okay to ask. It's okay to ask someone, are you okay? Do you need help? I think there's a lot in dealing with people with disabilities who present differently, of sort of wanting to avert our eyes. And, I think for those of us who have a family member or a child with a disability or have a disability ourselves, that's not possible. And, we've talked a lot about being seen and being known. And, I think a lot about, and I've probably told this story to everyone on this panel a few times, but, my daughter, who's 11 now, has a severe form of epilepsy and developmental disabilities, but for much of her life has presented physically as a typical appearing child. And when she was like 3 or 4 and, only had a few words, people would start conversations with her and talk to her in the playground. And, we would always just say, oh, she's shy. And she wasn't shy. She's not a shy kid. She's an affectionate kid. She's a loving kid. She's a very friendly kid. And, we were saying that to make other people comfortable, not because what it was true. And so I think what I would sort of encourage everyone is to think about those moments in which is someone trying to make you comfortable, and to sort of try to push past that and see the person or really understand what's going on. And once we sort of move past that and we're able to say to people, no, she has some real communication difficulties. It really opened up the world, because people were like, oh yeah, now I understand. And so, that would just sort of be my, do it tomorrow and then every day for the rest of your life.
Going along the same vein as David, starting the education in the home as young as possible. So when, let's say you're in the park, you have a 2-year-old, and they're saying, "Hey, what is that person using, like, to get around?" And you go, "Shh, no, don't say that. That's bad." The undertone that is implied there is that it's shameful. That shouldn't be spoken about. It's a secret. It's not. It's there. They can see it. So it's a very confusing message, and I think the education begins in the home. So if, obviously, like, kind of read the room sort of thing, but, like, if that person seems open to it, like, go up to them, introduce yourself. Don't start with, like, the what are your cool wheels for, but, like, be like, "Hi, my name is so and so, and I like cars." Great. You now have a conversation open. Cars, wheels, wow, they connect. Like, just find the connection as opposed to the differences, because the reality is that at minimum 15% of this world has a disability. And by the end of our lives, I just did a paper on this, so I can, like, say, yeah, by age 65, that number rises, like, significantly, and basically either we or the person closest to us has a disability or a, like, higher need. So keep it in mind that even if it's not you today, it could be you tomorrow.
All right, I want to thank our task force for sharing so honestly and thoughtfully this morning, and for all of the hard work that went into envisioning this day, and all of the hard work that you're doing on creating the accommodations table that hopefully folks saw as they came in, on creating the educational signage, on creating the survey that we really ask that you all fill out on Monday morning, which will give us a better sense of what the needs are in the community and how we can best respond to those, of helping think about how our staff and board can continue to train and learn and know what we need to do in order to lead the organization in a responsible way, and thinking about all the physical spaces that we inhabit. I'm so grateful to this team for all of the hours you've put in, for the ways that you are leading this community. And I encourage folks to come up and get to know these people a little bit better and continue to learn their stories. And as you all said so many times so beautifully, right, when we lead with curiosity, with listening, with a desire to connect to the human being in front of us, that's how we make manifest what we read in today's Torah portion, right, that creation is in fact tov ma'od. Creation is indeed very good. And so we thank you so much. And thank you all for staying and being part of this conversation. And Shabbat Shalom to everyone.